Morning, folks. Let's see. I stumbled across a concept that I found extremely interesting last night. Unexpectedly, I'm in a class on Hinduism and ecology. It's interesting, but it's a little challenging. It feels like I kind of wish it was a little bit more academic rigor to the class. It doesn't mean there isn't academic. It's there, but it's also like there's just a lot of exploration of various art forms and things, which are very beautiful, but it seems like we spend a lot of time looking at things and not a lot of time like deeply exploring and looking at the roots. I'm really interested in like kind of the historical, cultural roots of certain trends and things. So anyway, my complaint is that it feels a little fluffier than I wanted. I wanted a really deep kind of dive into it. Anyway, that said, it's still a class I enjoy. It's a good class, and I'm learning things. One of the things that I came across was this concept of intermittent sacrality. I had never heard that before, that term, and I think it is really interesting. I think it's a fabulous description of a phenomenon that's very common in religious life and in everyday life. Intermittent sacrality is like basically is recognizing that even sacred spaces can only last so long. They're finite. Creating sacred space, but it's like you can't go to church every day. Every single day. You have to live your life too, right? Using a Christian metaphor. Church is on Sunday. It's not every single day, even though there are practices you do on your own. There's an element of specific sacredness that comes about when you do rituals with groups of people, and that's a little different, or not in groups of people, but specific type of ritualistic things that you don't do in other times. In the case of what I'm studying in India, it's a form of art called I'm gonna pronounce this wrong, so I'm so sorry. Kolam, Kolam. There's a accent mark over the O. It's from the southern part of India, Tamil country, Tamil Nadu, I guess. I feel silly saying these things because I don't speak the language and I don't know a whole lot of what they mean, although I know what Tamil is. But the idea that this art is a way of honoring kind of like the earth and thanking the earth for providing life and apologizing for walking on the earth goddess all the time. Anyway, things like that, right? So there's here's this conscientiousness, and it's done with rice flour, right? You're doing this art I think like Navajo sand painting or Tibetan mandala, but it's not a mandala. It's like this elaborate geometrical artwork done with rice flour and different types of colored rice flour, right? And it's done with the rice flour on the doorstep of the home on the way in, and there's this idea. It's idea of of this giving without any expectation of reciprocation. Like the rice flour feeds the ants and the birds and the other little creatures, non-human creatures will come and eat the rice, and so there's a sense of like giving to nature as a spiritual practice, giving and not expecting return, just giving for giving's sake, for being for acknowledging your role as in some sense as nature. So in this type of giving, since you're not giving with a sense of reciprocation, I'm not expecting something back. Essentially, it makes you realize you're actually giving to yourself. You are nature. You're not. Nature doesn't have to do things back for you because you actually are nature, and so by taking care of these creatures, you take care of you. That's my understanding of it anyway. It's very new to understanding this, but in this context, there's these elaborate rituals, and people do these things to honor the earth goddess, and I can't remember her name, begins with a B. Like I said, I just recently read this. But the rituals are done and all this stuff, and then people go about and throw trash out their window and do all the things that normal people do, and it's really baffling if you don't understand the way that sacred space is used. And it's not just used in Hindu religion. It's like I said, it's in Christian religion, but it's like in anything. Like in my other class, Religion and Human Evolution, he talks about Robert Bella talks about the multiple realities, lots of ways of being. Like there's the workaday world of subject and object, where I'm me and you're you, and we're different, because that's true. It's a reality. But then there's the kind of numinous reality, the kind of like macrocosmic reality, where those differences are not significant. Where, I am you and you are me, and we are all actually the universe or God or whatever you want to call it. We're all one thing that appears as many, right? So both of those are realities. Both those things have reality. And in the West, we're very attached to the first one, the workaday world, subject-object thing. We're not so much into the second one, at least in the materialistic, scientific, secular traditions. And we tend to, anyway. So there's that kind of consciousness available to us, those different types. And one of the things that Bella says is that, you can't really stay. It's too painful and anxiety provoking to stay in this, workaday world, everyday life reality, because it's just, you're a small part and you have to struggle to get your needs met. It's the Darwinian, fight for survival kind of business. And it's really, it's not a great world to live in. So we often need to, for our own psycho-emotional, whatever, health, spiritual health, have to, not escape is not the right word, but we must we must take time in sacred space to kind of like heal ourselves. And these columns, these artistic things, are designed as healing things. They're healing sacred spaces, and so they're created spaces. And it reminds me of the what I read in the rituals of the Vedas, where they would do these outside. So there is not a permanent temple. They would create the sacred space as part of the ritual. And then when the ritual's done, the space is, it's finished. And one of the texts I was reading about in this, in the Hindu class, it was like, well, the gods are invited. They come in, they have a little meal, and you take care of them, whatever it is, whatever your ritual offering is. You feed the gods, and, you make your requests, and then you ask them to leave. Thanks for coming, God. Move along now. It's so amusing to me, because, like, I can't imagine, think about like Job saying, hey, God, yeah, I know about all those harpoons in the nose of Leviathan and all that stuff, but, like, can you move along now? It's just such a different power dynamic, in this tradition. It's much more intimate and, like, familial almost. It's cool. It's kind of refreshing to see it done so differently. It's definitely not the same kind of relationship you have in most forms of, say, Christianity or Islam or something. God is really asymmetrical. God's like this huge thing, and you're this tiny thing, and, all that. And in this one, it's like, hey, come on down, have some food, maybe do me a favor, and then, see you later, hospitality's done now. So, okay. So anyway, I diverge, but bringing it back to the concept of intermittence, sacrality, okay? So once the sacred space is finished, it goes back to being a normal space. It goes back to the everyday world, right? Once the God leaves, then we're back in the normal world again. And it doesn't mean that the world itself is not something significant. It just means that you can't maintain a sacred space indefinitely. You also have to brush your teeth. You got to go to the bathroom. You got to go and do these things. And I know there's some traditions, like Buddhist traditions and Zen traditions and other traditions, that aspire to maintain, even Hindu traditions and Christian traditions. I mean, it's within all the traditions, but there are some strands where, like, this is the monastic and mystical aspect, where there's an effort to maintain that sense of the sacred, right? So if you can walk around in all day long feeling the sacred, then you're probably enlightened. That's probably a good definition of what enlightenment is. But it's not an easy thing to do, and not everyone can do that. Obviously, just look around. If everyone could, we probably would be living in a different world right now. But the idea that you do this thing and then it goes back to being the normal subject-object thing again is really puzzling when you see people honoring, say, like in India, honoring the earth goddess and doing all these things, and then throwing garbage out their window, trashing the earth, right? Or you look at the Ganges, and the Ganges is one of the most polluted rivers in the world, and they're doing their sacred bathing in it. You're like, what is going on? That's gross. Like, why are they doing that? They can get sick, right? This is the Western view, because it just looks at things very differently. Creating sacred space purifies things and whatnot, and I can already hear the folks saying, yes, well, that's all fine and good, believe what you want, but you're still going to get sick, physically, and you're like, okay, well, I get you, and that's the problem with the with the intermittent part, is that if we just kind of like say, thanks to the earth with our ritual and then trash it, then we haven't really made any ecological progress in the Western sense of integrating with the environment in a sustainable way. And so while the insights can be present in some of these traditions, the insights are present in the rituals, and there's an awareness of these things, they're not carried over into the everyday lifestyles. And so that means they have very limited impact in some senses on the environmental care. They have very little impact in shaping the behavior of people when they're not in the ritual itself. So it's very confusing, right? From the outside, if you're looking from a tradition from the outside, like, if I look at like this tradition, I'd be like, well, here you do all these nice things for the earth, and then you trash it. What's going on? It seems like you're a hypocrite, right? Or, oh, you go to church every Sunday and you're supposed to, love thy neighbor, yet, here you are screaming at people about, not agreeing with you in some religious thing. You're like, that doesn't seem right. But I think it has to do with this concept of intermittent sacrality. The sacred space is delineated from the everyday space, and I'm not even sure how to approach this in the sense of like, I look at it, I'm like, okay, it's problematic in a certain sense, because you're like, well, yes, we should all be enlightened all the time. I mean, who doesn't want that, right? But is that realistic? I mean, maybe somewhat. Maybe there's not black and white, there's a middle ground, but is it possible? Is it even reasonable to try and hold people accountable to living in a sacred space their entire lives? It seems almost impossible. As much as it is impossible or miserable to live in the everyday world, where it's like, people are taking Prozac just so they can wake up in the morning and go to work. I mean, it's like, geez, these people are not having a good time. So the question is, intermittent sacrality, what do you do with that? What do you do with it? I think what you do with it is you have to be aware of it. You have to be aware of it when having conversations with people who are very religious in this sense, and just understand that they may know what you're talking about. They may have a deep sense of what you're talking about, but they may not understand how to integrate it into everyday life. It may not be a part of the tradition. Anyways, I never really thought about that before, but it makes perfect sense, and I'm glad I stumbled upon it, because it's some fertile ground for thought. So, anyways, a little bit longer video, a lot of rambling. Hopefully, it's interesting. Hopefully, I'm not just boring your brains out, but I find it interesting. So, thank you for listening, and I'll post again when I have something worth saying. Bye.